Hello, this is Will. I'm a real werewolf. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you would, or video or whatever. I've been asked to stop swearing by Louis, so as a favour, I'm going to stop swearing in this bit. Hello again. We're almost at the end. I think this is like second to last interview that I'm going to do for Louis. Apparently I'm not supposed to say Louis, but I'm sure he'll cut Louis out when I've said Louis a few more times. Louis. Oh, you're not going to cut it out? Okay, alright. Well, my name's Will, I'm a werewolf, I'm a real werewolf, and I'm getting towards the end of these interviews now. I'm getting bored with them, but been talking about my family, my tribe and my heritage and stuff. This is about talking to it's my wife's grandfather. He's kind of like the top werewolf in Russia. So I'm going to tell his story really, and a few things I have to verify here. Subscribe to this shitty YouTube channel if you want to get more information about werewolves. I'm sure it'll continue. Apparently there's a website going to be set up in the next couple of months or something. It might be up now, I'm not sure. It's like Werewolf, what is it? www.werewolf.host, apparently. Could you not afford .com? No. Okay. And last thing is, a werewolf posit is a werewolf soul, and it's a separate thing to you as a man, or a person, should I say. It's like a wolf soul, and it combines with me to make me a werewolf when I need it. If I don't need him, he follows me around. We bimble around together. He's like my sensei. He teaches me stuff. And it's dead good. Also, if you can't understand my accent, I'm sorry, I'm from Rochdale in Manchester. So for you Americans, it must be a pain in the ass. Turn on the subtitles, okay? And also there are transcriptions at werewolf.host. www.werewolf.host. Please like the video. Apparently it's a good thing, and subscribe. And I'm booked in for the 16th of January in studios in London to do a live transformation. So I will see you there, and hopefully you'll see the proof of the pudding if I make it. I'm probably going to get killed for what I'm doing at the moment, but there we go. Anyway, after all that banter, here's the story. I've written it down. It's a long one, so if you're going to get bored, you can fuck off now. I don't give a shit. Okay, meeting grandfather. Often away, I would meet the most interesting characters. Some of them would be in the hunt, so I talked about the hunt in my last interview. This is where I met her grandfather. That's my wife's grandfather. My wife, the werewolf. He was fully wolfen. Wolfen is when a werewolf goes fully wolf, spending very little time in any form but his wolf form. Grigory was a giant wolf amongst giant wolves, and he'd been the original patriarchal head of the family. Wolves do not have alphas, as we are told they do, but if they did, then this would have been the original one of the werewolves. I was a big wolf, but he stood another head above mine. I did not meet him until the third trip away. Apparently he met up with the rest of the family very rarely, but he'd chosen to join us on this hunt this year. One early evening after a particularly miserable day on the mountains, we picked our way back to the campsite. It had been wet and blustery, and the prey had been easily spooked and quickly lost in the murk. There had been a moment or two of excitement when a couple of pack accidentally bumped into a young mother brown bear with her two cubs. Still, after that killing, nothing of note happened. When we got back to our tents, it was cold and raining, and the light was fading. We were all ravenous, and just as ravenous as the biting flies who tortured us every evening. The little bastards were not deterred by damp weather, and they had the unique ability to break the hide of a werewolf. He was just sat there at the campsite waiting for us, this massive fuck-off wolf, this strange, enormous beast. His right eye was a patchwork of scars, half his right ear was missing, and at some point he'd lost a chunk from his nose. I was a little confused, as him being a werewolf, he should have regenerated all that after such an injury, to be healthy again. Maybe it was just a wolf. A giant wolf. What was it doing here, sat so blatantly in the middle of the site? The rest of the pack slowed and sat at the edge of the camp. As Al, that's Asa's father, my wife's father, he's kind of like the boss at this point. As Asa's father went forward and head down towards the sitting wolf, as a wolf, you could tell that this creature was a different thing than even us. It frightened a full-grown male werewolf, for fuck's sake. What could scare a fully grown werewolf? I'd never known anything like this. Al, Asa's father, was extremely cautious as he moved towards the beast. His ears were flat and he made himself look as small as he possibly could, each step forward hesitant and crouching. Every now and again he would pause to sniff and lift his head. He was constantly checking the demeanour and the reaction of the other animal. The giant wolf himself just sat there looking around at his surroundings. Only now and again would he look back to the approaching owl, showing little interest in him, really. Al slowly got closer, and the big wolf's ears pricked up. He started slowly stretching and getting to his feet, a little like the family dog at home. The tension then dissipated, and the two wolves ran to each other, the pleasure in their meeting being very apparent. At first I thought they were going to fight, but they were play wrestling with each other. It seemed like they were friends that had not seen each other for some length of time. As this release of tension, the rest of the pack also entered the sight. It was surprising to see them all with a submissive air as they met this large wolf. All were happy to see him, yet all were showing him tremendous deference. Finally, after all the other wolves had said their greetings, I was introduced by Asa, my wife, to him. He looked at me somewhat dismissively and then just left with Al. That evening we sat around fire logs in groups talking and laughing about the day. My partner and I sat in a small group of friends chatting with the entire band, and then it suddenly all came to a hush. A huge man had just walked out of the central tent. He was naked to the waist and wore a pair of trousers that had obviously seen better days. A woman came forward and proffered him a blanket that he wrapped around his shoulders, and he made his way to the table where Al and his sons were sat. All eyes were on him, all trying to get a glance at the legend in their midst. He smiled, and the spell was broken, everyone breathing freely again. Once he was seated, the rest of the pack's conversations and the vodka started to flow once more. One of Al's sons then came over to where we were sat chewing on the remains of a leg bone of something large. "Grigory has asked you to join us," he said in a good-natured tones, no threat in his voice. We were motioned towards the main table. I felt nervous as I walked the short distance home to the group. I believe it was the thing that humans might call anxiety. When I got to the table, I was offered a seat next to Grigory. His posit sat behind him. It looked just like mine, actually. The same size and colour and the same eyes. A perfect match. Grigory just sat for some time observing me. My posit sat close, staring at his posit. He then started to speak to me in a language that I did not understand. It was not Russian, it was something else. Al at this point smirked, noticing my discomfort. Grigory finished speaking and Asa started to translate for me into English, but was stopped when Al reached for her arm and did the translating himself. "Grigory says welcome home. He is asking if you know the history of your dusha," he translated. Apparently dusha means soul in Russian. I think he must have meant my posit, but I did mean my posit. So yeah. I smiled and said, "Thanks, it feels like home. My dusha is very special. I have shared his memories many times and I know that he is ancient. I've been shown and told about those that went before me, but that is all," I replied. Al translated for Grigory. Grigory laughed and nodded while he downed a shot of vodka. Turning himself more towards me, he began to look serious. He talked once more. Al nodded and then turned towards me. "Grigory wants you to know that the dusha that you share your life with is his brother's. He wishes to know how you two met and if you have any news of his brother. He is confused about why the dusha left his brother and for what reason he did so. I did not recognize your dusha at first. He is the posit linked to Gennady. Gennady was Grigory's brother, the reason why Grigory left us to the wild. This fact is serious, Will. Grigory is very important to my family. I could feel the next few moments would be pivotal." I had no idea as to the names of the people involved in my posit's past, Al. "If there is a way that we can find this out, I would be pleased to answer any questions," I told him. "He's just been my guide and light since I was a small baby. We love each other deeply." I smiled at my posit, my dusha, who nodded his head. Al then started talking to Grigory, who nodded his head and replied a lot with da, da. They carried on with the conversation for some time, and then when they came to a natural end, they turned to me and smiled. Grigory would like you to ask what is your douche's memory of his brother. I turned to my posit, or doucher, or whatever I was calling him now, and asked in my mind if he knew of Gennady. The posit's body language told me all. His ears drooped. He sat and dropped his head towards the ground and seemed to sigh mentally. I cannot say all before Grigor. It is Grigor that caused my Jen to leave. He caused him to leave for the sake of his lost love, my posit was telling me, Fen was telling me. Jen was a great being, a strong being who, instead of hurting his brother, Grigory, would leave and let them be. That broke him. He never made it back. That's why I left him. He wanted me no more in the end. He wanted to pass, my posit told me woefully. I thought, this conversation is not going to be as straightforward as I thought it was. Al looked at me, Grigor looked at me, and they both had lit thick cigars and refilled their glasses and sat back waiting for a reply. Also, my wife was watching me with a hint of mirth on her face. She could see I was uncomfy, and because this was a rare situation for me, she was enjoying it. Both men took a long draw on their individual smokes, and Al leaned in towards me. So, Will, what does your douche say? Well, he says that he left Gennady because he was broken after something happened, I replied. Da, continue, Al said. He says that Gennady left because of love, I asked. Al smiled at me and leant back in towards Grigor. He looked contemplative as he considered what I had just said to him. Grigor nodded at Al a few times. He gave his translation. I saw him physically wince a couple of times, and then, when Al had stopped, Grigor's head fell forward into his hands and he placed the cigar onto a plate near him. After some time he looked up at Al and nodded. I could almost see him thinking. He then sniffed and sat back in his seat, placing his massive palms on his knees, and just paused. After what seemed a lifetime, he turned to me and spoke to my posit directly. The posit looked very sad and shifty. Altana was a name, came the posit's thoughts. Altana. She was Grigor's first wife. She was golden white-furred like her name and beautiful in her forms. Woman and wolf. She was Grigor's first, but Gennady wanted her. Gennady loved his brother, and she was pregnant with Grigor's child, so he left. She said she loved Grigor, and that she wanted to continue her life with him, and so he left for his brother's sake. Al and Grigor looked at me. I thought they'd heard the posit, then I realised that was not the case. Asa squeezed my hand and looked at me imploringly. I had to tell him this. I leant into Al a little closer and whispered, "This is all a little bit difficult, Al. I don't think I should really say." Al reached out and put his hand on my shoulder and looked me in the eye. "I am afraid you have no choice, Will. You have no choice. You must share your douche's thoughts." "Right, okay," I said. "Well, he says that Gennady was in love with Grigor's wife, and when they found out that she was pregnant, that she decided she wanted to stay with Grigor, so Gennady left." I have to admit that I said this very quickly to get it out of the way. It was embarrassing. I had nothing to do with this, yet I felt this would make things complicated with Grigor and Al and, of course, my wife. Al looked at me in the eye, and then his eyes dropped to the table as he nodded, putting the cigar back in his mouth. He turned back towards Grigor. He started speaking once more, and Grigor listened and then turned his head and started staring not at me, but into me. It was only at this point I realised that Al was Grigor's son, possibly the baby that Altana was carrying when Gennady left. At the end of Al's talk, Grigor leant back in his seat and took a long drag on his cigar. He then stubbed it out on the empty plate, and then sprang up and walked away without a word. He did not seem happy. I stood up as he left the scene and did not know if I should try and appease the giant. Should I say something? Al stood up in front of me and gently put a hand on my chest and pushed me back down into my seat. As we watched the figure walk away, his posit remained to stare at mine. Then on the whistle from the distant figure, he sprang after Grigor, and catching up, they condensed into a wolf and ran into the night. The next few days were a bit weird for me. I was treated very differently now. The story of what had transpired spread to the rest of the pack. They now viewed me and my dusha, my posit, with new respect. Gennady had been the most prominent and nastiest member of the tribe before he disappeared. He'd been a creature of legend in the mountains. He'd been the horror in the night, and his brother had been the leader of the pack, and the father to many of the tribe. Koshi, a young werewolf, had come to me one evening as I sat by my tent and started to tell me of Gennady. I say young, but his posit had been with him since the founding of the pack, so although he looked 18 years of age, I realised that he was centuries old. He told me one of the most intimidating stories of Gennady's life, and in the next interview, I will tell you that story.